We're here today with Julie Broderson, who is the outreach person at Good Shepherd. Julie, thank you for joining us and sharing your story with us. Well, I'd like to basically start kind of at the beginning. Can you talk about the origins of your faith journey, because you've been involved in ministry for pretty much your whole life?
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me to share a little of my faith journey, and it's a privilege to do that. I was raised in a Christian home, so I grew up learning how to read the Bible, say my prayers, go to church on Sunday, pray before my meals, but other than that, we didn't talk about faith. And was born in rural Alabama in a small town, and then we moved when I was 8 years old from South Alabama to about an hour outside of New York City. And that move was dramatic for me and really hard for me. Didn't have any siblings at home at that time. I was just by myself with my parents, and I was so incredibly angry with them. And those next 3 years were full of a lot of ugliness in me and ugliness in my home, and things that my parents did that they probably regret. And then we moved again to Kentucky. And that move introduced me to a new faith community here, a new church, and I was old enough to go to youth group. And I think I finally heard the gospel in a really contextual way that made sense to me, and it was a gospel based on love. That there's a God, the creator of the universe, that loves me, and I didn't feel that love at home. I just felt anger and hate, and so I responded to that by saying, I want to be a Christ follower. I don't really know what that means, but I'm going to give it a shot. And so I began that journey just shy of my 12th birthday, and and have been following Jesus ever since, the best I know how, in the context of my life and the journey that God's put me on. So that's kind of how it all started.
Was there any particular person who was influential in this sort of birth?
Well, back in the day, we used to do these youth encounter weekends is what we call them, and we were kind of locked in the church for a couple of days, and we had a lot of fun, and we played a lot of crazy games, and we had Bible studies, and there was a college student that just shared the gospel story, and it was actually based in John 3:16, for God so loved the world. That was the message that really touched my heart. It was, put your name in there. For God so loved Julie that he gave his only son. And I just somehow knew in my spirit that that was true, that God loved me. And I desperately wanted love in my life, and so I just said yes to that. So I never knew their name. I don't remember their name, but that's who had a profound impact on that decision that I made. And then what happened is I began to grow in my faith and learn more about God and what it means to be a Christ follower. And I would come home and talk to my parents about that, and it began to change my whole family dynamic. And my family life over the course, didn't happen overnight, but over the course of probably the next 6 to 7 years, things changed dramatically. And my home became a home of peace and love and acceptance. My parents really grew in their faith, and we got to a place of real understanding and deep friendship. So,
okay.
It's
God
pretty
works
remarkable.
in mysterious ways.
Yeah, for sure.
So now, as you grew into adulthood, you embarked on this faith journey and embracing your faith. Were there pivotal moments that you would describe as turning points for you?
Yeah, I think one of those would be just the influence of a woman by the name of June Markham, who was a leader in our church, and she invited me to be a part of the outreach team. And I was probably 14 or 15 years old. And so to have an adult that is a leader and very well respected in the community to ask me to be a part of that. And she didn't just ask me as a token, she really wanted to know what I thought about things. And that was remarkable to have her believe in me and invest in me. And she helped to organize and send me on my very first mission trip when I was a senior in high school to Haiti.
Okay.
And so I think without her influence and support, that may have never happened in my life, and that sent me on a path of really believing that I felt just at home in other cultures and really wanted to learn about other cultures and that just, I think, changed my life. So that's one turning point for me. I think another one came for me when I was, after I graduated from college, and I majored in theater administration, and I got a job here working at the Opera House, and loved my work, but I also was at the church 5 days a week, doing all kinds of different things at the church. And I went on another short-term mission trip. This would be my second one, to Brazil. And when I came back from that, I met a Christian anthropologist who had trained our team, and we talked and got to know each other, became really good friends. And he said, you know, you could make a career of this, studying these things, you know. And so then after I'd been in my job for about 3 years at the Opera House, I had to make a decision. Do I pursue going forward and kind of, you know, theater's not just something you dabble in. It's a lifestyle. It's a passion. And I loved it, but then also the church was my passion. And I met someone who finally spoke kind of a heart language to me that I felt like this is kind of what's always been in me. And he had the language for that to help me understand it. And so I ended up going to seminary and studying with him and feeling like I was going to go into full-time cross-cultural work.
Now, as you're talking about the church, you're not actually talking about the Episcopal Church, are you?
No. No, I was raised in the Methodist Church and have been a lifelong Methodist. And I went to Baptist church in college, and I went to Assemblies of God some, and of course when you're overseas you go wherever, you know, indigenous. So I'm not real tied to denominations, but I do love John Wesley.
Gotcha.
And really believe in the things that he did and have studied him quite a bit, and so I'm a huge fan of Wesley.
Okay. Now, so yeah, you made the decision to focus on church and your outreach. Mm-hmm. Is that true? How did that go, and how did that progress throughout your life?
Yeah. Well, my husband and I, when I first got out of seminary, I ended up having a child 6 weeks before I graduated, and we ended up being part of a church plant that was a multicultural, multiracial, intentionally multiracial church to kind of work on racial reconciliation. And so we did that for 5 years, and that's what I did for ministry. I was not working outside the home. I was taking care of my children. I ended up having another child. And then we felt at a point that it was time to transition out of that, and we ended up going back to our home church where we both grew up and being there. And after being there, I just got involved as a person in the community, in the congregation. And after doing that for about 1.5 years, they said, you know, we probably should pay you to do that. So they hired me to be a pastor of outreach there, and I did that on staff for 23 years, so 25 years in total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned that you graduated from seminary, did you ever become ordained?
You know, not in the traditional sense, no. I did not. Okay. I did not want to go that route for a variety of reasons that I probably don't have time to go into here. But no, I can do weddings and funerals. I am ordained now, but not in the conventional way.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So there also, as I understand it, was a time when you really wanted to do an overseas mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so that was the plan when I went to seminary, and I met my husband, and we'd known each other growing up, but we reconnected when I was in seminary, and we married when I was in seminary, and he was on board, and we took a couple of trips to Brazil, and because I'd lived in Brazil before seminary, and loved it, and just felt most alive in that kind of environment. And he was like, yeah, let's go. He was open for anything. And so after our youngest was about 2, we started applying for mission agencies, and the first one said no because, well, yeah, it's complicated. It has to do some gender issues.
Okay.
I don't know. And so with theology about leadership and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So that was the first one, and then the second one, a few years later, we tried again with another one, and again some challenges, and that didn't work out. And then again, we had the opportunity and applied to go, and then found out there were some problems in Brazil with the leadership there that were problematic.
Gotcha.
So, but all that time we kept taking our family down there, and really felt that that's something that God would open up for us, that door to be in ministry, and our kids loved it, and it never happened. So
Okay.
I kind of have lived in that shadow of a little bit of a disappointment that I've never been able to go in the traditional sense of going and living for a long time in one particular place. But then over and over again, God has said to me, I need you here to mobilize other people to go. So in some ways that helps multiply the impact. And there are probably 4 or 5 young people in the world today that I can point to who are living in the other places, who came out of the ministry that I had, and they're doing incredible work, and many others that I was able to help support as they went. And so, multiplication can be
Yes.
significant.
Yes. So you opened yourself up to the possibility, and God had different plan for you.
Yeah.
So being open to God's plan led you on a different path.
It did. It did.
Now, were there ever times when you felt challenged or let down or disappointed in your faith and your path?
Sure. That's just, isn't that normal for all? I hope it's normal for all of us. I think it is. But absolutely, there have been a lot of different moments, some big and some small. But I think that's part of sort of, our faith is kind of like this. But I think one real significant one was that my sister-in-law was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer on our daughter's 2nd birthday. And she was 27 years old and just an amazing human being. And that just kind of shattered our world. But then, you pull together and we're like, we're going to fight this. And she's, she had stem cell transplant and everything's going to be fine. And it was for a few years, and then the cancer came back. I think that's when it really, I just was like, God, what, the anger in me was so strong, and I just wasn't getting along with God anymore. I just was like, you just aren't good. You aren't a good God. And I wrestled with God for about 1.5 years or so in that place. I never felt God was far from me, but I felt like I was far from God. And I spent a lot of time in the Psalms, just reading them out of just a desire to be, because Psalms express so much of that anger and why have you forsaken me, God? And so that's kind of where I lived that time. And I eventually came around to a place of, Jesus, his life was full of suffering and difficulty and disappointment. So why should I expect anything any different than that? You still have that anger and you have to own it and acknowledge it, but I finally was able to move past that and just go, this is terrible, but
Okay.
this is the journey.
Yes.
we all get this. It happens to us in different forms and ways, and so that was a biggie for me.
So spending most of your life in the Methodist Church and in service in the Methodist Church, what the heck happened that led you to the Episcopal Church?
Well, that's a great question. Churches go through different leaders and seasons, and some of those leaders you connect with and some you don't. And so I just reached a place where I felt a little like that the leadership and I were not on the same page for a variety of reasons. And some of the transitions that were part of the bigger picture Methodist Church, and then some were local issues. And so I took a step away. It was a really hard decision because I'm not that far from retirement. It was a really tough decision, but it was the right decision for my own spiritual health. And took about 1 year off of just kind of figuring things out and really kind of listening to God and reflecting and pursuing some other passions while I was kind of stepped away from that. And then the reason I ended up here at Good Shepherd is because Scott Hershey, who's the church administrator, and I had been colleagues in my previous position.
Okay.
And he and Jen and his family were all really good friends. And he knew that Good Shepherd was looking for someone to help with local outreach.
Okay.
And so he reached out to me and said, "You think you might consider this?" And so then I began to pray about that and think about that, and ultimately had some conversations with Hendry and his staff and thought, yeah, this could be a really good fit. You know, it's part-time, it still gives me space to pursue the things that I'm involved in outside of here, and then also to be connected to local ministry, which is something that I'm very passionate about.
Okay.
So yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Are there any particular programs or areas of outreach that have inspired you or you feel very strongly about?
I think my life has always been intertwined with people living on the streets, always. It started when I was pregnant with my first child, and I volunteered down at the Hope Center and helped serve meals to people. So that was 33 years ago. And then, you know, we got involved in things like Room in the Inn, which I know Good Shepherd loved and was part of when it was in existence. And that ministry really changed my whole family's life, because we got to build relationships and understand the faith journey of people who are experiencing homelessness, and realize how much they're like us, with the same hopes and dreams, and the same, and really their faith is in many ways much stronger than ours, because they have to depend on God for so much more than we do. So you know, always my life has been intertwined with folks that are living on the streets in various ministry capacities, involvement at the Salvation Army, just a variety of different things connecting with them. And I still am so grateful anytime someone living on the streets wants to share their story with me and let me get a peek into their lives. It's such an honor. You know, people at the Catholic Action Center, yeah, I just feel so honored when they allow me to be welcomed into their lives and hear their stories.
All right. Yeah, I know my experience in just a few years at the church, you know, I've seen a lot of that outreach, that effort to touch people who are on the streets or close to being on the streets. Very impressed by that myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to make a contribution in that regard, just through the church.
Yeah.
So are there any things about being at Good Shepherd, even though you grew up as a Methodist and you still are a Methodist, you know, that just inspire you, that make you feel this is home?
Well, I think the incredible hospitality that's here, the sense of welcome, the idea that all are welcome, the idea that you don't have to have it all figured out when you're welcomed here into fellowship and into belonging. That's important because I think so many of us in our society feel very isolated and lonely. So to come in and say, you can fit in here, we'll find a place for you, you do belong. If you want to be here, you belong. And then we'll help you believe if that's what you're seeking. I think that has been incredibly appealing and radical and wonderful to be in that kind of environment. And that's for everyone. And it's not, you have to look a certain way or you have to act a certain way. It's for everyone. And that's not very typical in a lot of faith communities.
No. Yeah, this is not the Episcopal Church I grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's been really wonderful. And the people here have just been very welcoming, just personally, to me and to my role, and excited and affirming, and coming out of an environment where I wasn't kind of on the same page with my colleagues, to coming into a place where I feel like I'm on the same page has been very life-giving to me.
Gotcha. So we're almost done, but I would kind of like to wrap up here. Throughout your faith journey, is there a particular lesson or epiphany that you've had that you would like to share with us?
Well, maybe two things.
Okay, that's fine.
You can always edit them out.
Yeah, you won't.
I think that serving is the path to discipleship, to real discipleship, is serving God and the call that God puts on our life in whatever season we're in, because I think it changes. And so serving others within the church, outside the church, and especially serving others who are different from us, has been where I've experienced the greatest growth in my spiritual life. It's not been from pastors and leaders. It's been through the ordinary people I encounter through serving God in all the different places that I've been.
Gotcha.
And so I just love to help people serve, whatever that means for them, because I want them to have that same sense of growth and God's presence and power in their lives. And then I would just, one of my life verses that I just cling to all the time is Romans 8:28. It's all things work to good for those who love God and are called according to God's purposes. And I think that verse has been so meaningful to me because it says to me that God can redeem any situation or circumstance in our lives. Whatever difficulty we're going through, not that it's going to make it go away, but God's presence and peace will be with us in the midst of it, and we're still loved. And God can redeem that and make it for good, like the Wicked movie says, for good. But it's true, and it's been true in the almost 50 years I've been following God, that God has redeemed the difficult things and redeemed some of the really good things and made them even better. And all things will and can work to good when we love God and are called according to God's purposes.
Okay. Well, Julie, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story. I think it's very inspirational.
Thank you.